Thanks for checking out Scotty's Hobbies. Today we're going to be replacing the rear pads, rotors, and everything that has to do with it on this 2007 Lexus ES350. This will be the same, if not very similar to other makes and models, such as, well, the other Lexus ES350s, that's going to be 2007 to 2009, Toyota Avalons from 2008 to 2011, and Toyota Camrys 07 to 2011. So this video will be covering all of those makes and models. I'm going to be covering the tools you're going to need. I'm going to show you how I do everything, give you some tips. In the whole process, I'm going to give you the torque specifications and everything. First, let's see what we're going to be removing. Everything is going to be 14 millimeter sockets, so you only need 14 millimeter socket to get this job done. Other tools too, but socket wise, just a 14 millimeter, and that's going to be for the caliper bracket and for the caliper itself. I chose to get these here Power Stop Evolution brake pad rotor set. It comes with the hardware kit, everything you need. First off, I'm going to spray some penetrating lube right here. This is the yellow WD-40 can. I like it better than the regular blue can. I'm just spraying it right here where the hub and the rotor meet. If there's any rust or anything that's going to make it harder to get off, that's where it's going to be at. So let that soak in, marinate while we're getting this job done. Make sure your parking brake or ear brake is not on or activated. Make sure your brake fluid reservoir is just open, cracked, so you don't build up any pressure and blow any seals. We're getting started real fast on this video, as you can see. Using a 14 millimeter shallow socket, 6-point preferable, I'm going to remove this caliper bolt. This bolt goes into the slider pins. You might need a crescent wrench to hold your slider pin from spinning, but in my case I did not. Could have showed you, that probably would have made it easier, but hey, didn't need it in my case. Hopefully this video does help you out, and if it does, make sure you comment below. And when you remove your bolts, make sure you get a better grip on it than I did right there. You see how as soon as it got loose, I almost fell off. So make sure you have a really good grip on that. Make sure you look for links in the description below to purchase tools and parts shown in this video. Tell everybody about me. I have a huge video library, including lots of brakes. Now that we have this caliper loose, we're going to set it off to the side. We don't want to let it hang on the brake line itself. So you see we're going to pull it straight up, just wiggle it up. You're going to have a little bit of resistance because the piston is pushed in, giving a little bit of friction when you're pulling it off of the old brake pad. Instead of letting it hang, put it up here, let it hang on the strut itself so you're not putting any pressure on the brake hose. I also have videos replacing the struts on the same vehicle, which cover the Avalon and the Camry too in the video library. So like, subscribe, and share. I have a lot more stuff coming out on this particular vehicle. To remove the brake caliper bracket to hub, you need a 14 millimeter. I'm using a 1/2 inch breaker bar to remove these. These are a little bit tighter. When we get to the tightening down or installation process part of this video, I will cover the torque specifications. Rear brake pads and rotors are usually not as tight as the front, so it's a little bit easier to do these at home. You can see this one I think was over tightened. The brakes on this vehicle are actually Mickey Mouse pretty good, I would say. So I just got this vehicle. I love it, and thank God I'm a mechanic, because if somebody else would have bought this vehicle, they would have been screwed. So hey, you guys get a lot of good videos coming soon. When you purchase the brake pads and brake parts for your vehicle, make sure that any kit you buy includes the hardware kit, and you might also need the boots. So the slider pin boots might also be necessary. You need to inspect all that when you're taking everything apart and doing this job, getting it completed. Just remove those bolts, set them off to the side so you don't lose them. It's going to be hard to ruin them. When you are removing everything, take note of the location of all the parts, such as the wear indicator right there on that brake pad. You want to install the new pad with the wear indicator in the proper location. Those let you know when the brakes have gone bad and your brake pads need to be replaced. So those are always important to have. And they seem to work better if you put them back in the right spot. They might start rubbing prematurely if you don't, or start rubbing too late if they're not in the right location. I use these long bolts to press on the hub assembly to remove the rotor. I forgot what the size of these were. I wrote down the thread pattern and size or length, but I lost those notes. So I'll make sure I add that into the description when I upload this. So take a look in the description for these bolts if you need them. I might even have a link to purchase them if you need them. Makes it a lot easier for you. If your rotors are bad, you might get a little pulsation in your brake pedal. Not so much in the rear rotors. You might get a slight vibration if your rear rotors were bad. So this might be a symptom if you did have a vibration. Here is your parking brake assembly, emergency brake assembly, whatever you like to call it. This presses. It's like a brake shoe. It presses on the inside of the brake rotor to apply pressure to hold the car. You can see through that little hole in the bottom of the hub, you can turn a little star, and that will adjust these shoes, brake shoes, in or out to make more pressure or less pressure on the rotor itself. You could do that adjustment right now. What I usually like is a good 3 to 5 spins on the rotor, and then it's stopping. That would be a good parking brake adjustment. You can see here is the brake pad kit that came with this set. It came with the pads, obviously, but more importantly, what I like is the hardware kit, and it has the new wear indicators as well. Has everything, all in one set. I didn't have to go purchase extra stuff. I didn't have to stress out because I didn't have anything, and I know this job is done properly. I like to do this to every brake job that I do when I touch. Is remove the slider pins. When you do a BJ, you want to do the best BJ you could do. You don't want to Mickey Mouse a BJ. So here is some brake grease that is specifically designed for brakes. It's high temperature, and I've never really had any failures using this or any gunk up or gum up using this, as long as the brake caliper itself was nice and clean. Use this really liberally. You want to make sure that your slider pins slide in and out of the caliper bracket freely. Also, take note of the boots right here. If you have any ripped boots, get those replaced right now, because your grease is going to leak out, and then you're going to have a non-lubricated surface and just have more brake problems in the future. Make sure your slider pins slide freely, no leaks at all, so your grease stays in place. Let's move on to the brake pads. When you remove them, make sure you take note of where the wear indicators are. It looks like this brake pad assembly has wear indicators on both pads. Just make sure you know where the location is. Now that we have the brake pads out, let's go ahead and remove the hardware. I ripped these out using some pliers. Don't really care for them because we're going to put some new ones on. Set them off to the side. Grab the new hardware kit. Press it into the caliper bracket as best you can. I'm going to end up using the pliers to press everything completely into place. You just want to make sure you don't have anything overlapping the inside so it doesn't rub on the rotor when it turns, or when the vehicle turns, the rotor shifts a very, very tad bit, but you don't want it to rub on the rotor at all. A new hardware kit will help the brakes not squeak. This is one of the big reasons that vehicles or brake jobs squeak right after they're done, or very, very shortly after the brake job is done. People come back and go, "Why are my brakes squeaking?" Well, that's because you've probably used your old hardware kit, or you might have used some really cheap brake pads. With the hardware kit completely installed, let's put the new wear indicators in the proper location. You might want to take pictures when you're taking everything apart, so when you start reinstalling stuff, you're like, "Oh yeah, I forgot where it went." Look at your phone or wherever you're taking pictures, and you'll have everything notated. Now we are ready to reinstall everything. You don't want to put any brake grease on the hardware kit. Just let metal rub on metal. When you're installing your new rotor, you want to make sure you take note of where the adjustment hole is, or the inspection hole is right there. So in the future, if you want to take a look at your parking brake pad shoe, you could look through there and see it. I like to install one lug nut or multiple lug nuts onto the rotor when I'm reinstalling my brake pad sets or my brakes. It makes it a lot easier so the rotor itself doesn't slap around or move around. Before I go too far, let's get these dust covers on the rotor too. Again, I like the rotor to spin 3 to 5 times freely, and that makes me feel that the parking brake is freely or... Now, this is where it is important to make sure your brake fluid reservoir is open or the cap is a little bit loose. We're going to press the piston, brake caliper piston, back into the caliper itself. Doing it in this fashion, you do not need to bleed the brakes. So this would be, there's no bleeding at all of the brakes when you do it in this fashion. You're using this process. When you get done doing the brakes, before you go anywhere, before you put the car in drive, reverse, or anything, you want to make sure you pump the brakes until the brake pedal gets nice and stiff. You're going to want to push the piston all the way into the caliper as much as possible. Make sure you take note of any leaks, or if there is any, you're going to want to replace the caliper at that time, and you will need to bleed the brakes if you replace the caliper. Now we're going to install the caliper bracket. This bracket is what holds the brake pads, and it bolts on to the hub assembly right there. 14mm bolts. I like to use a 6-point socket if possible. It is pretty important to torque these down. Make sure they're tight. Not tight enough would be really a big issue if they start falling off, but if they're too tight, you might strip them out. So the proper torque specification for those bolts, or these bolts, are looking at 46 foot-pounds. That's 46 foot-pounds, 14mm socket to tighten these down. If you don't have a torque wrench, look for a link in the description to purchase one if needed. And if you have other vehicles that you're trying to take care of the maintenance on, make sure you check out my video library for other videos on other vehicles that cover everything from PCV valves, air filters, cabin air filters, brakes, a bunch of stuff. And please tell everybody about me. Let's get this caliper bracket tightened down, and we could get to moving on to installing the brake pads. With the brake pads, the biggest thing is you want to make sure your wear indicator is in the proper location. You don't want the brake pad to rub metal to metal on the brake rotor before your wear indicator does, so it's important to make sure it's in the proper location. I'm not sure if I told you that already. Make sure you get both brake pads in and they are moving freely. You don't want them to be cockeyed or sideways at all so that they get stuck like the first time you try to push on your brakes. When you install the brake caliper itself, you want to make sure your piston's still fully compressed into the caliper, like that, and slide it directly over the brake pads. Should be pretty easy to do this because that gap should be way bigger than the brake pads and rotor. You're going to grab your 14mm bolts that go into the slider pins and tighten them down finger tight. These ones are, you're going to want to push the piston all the way into the caliper as much as possible. Make sure you take note of any leaks, or if there is any, you're going to want to replace the caliper at that time. And you will need to bleed the brakes if you replace the caliper. Now we're going to install the caliper 14mm socket. This bracket is what holds the brake pads. I am going to use my 3/8 torque wrench to tighten this down. 14mm bolts. You might even be able to use a quarter-inch socket if possible. And also, it is pretty important to torque these down. Make sure they're just fine too if you have that one instead of this one. Not tight enough would be really a big issue. I usually like to start falling off, but if they're too tight, you might strip them out. If you need, you might need the proper torque specification for those bolts or these bolts to hold the slider pin at 46 tightening this down. That's 46 foot-pounds, 14mm socket. Now, if you did this job at home, if you don't have a torque wrench, this kit cost me about $250 for both sides and everything. And if you have other vehicles that you're trying to take care of the maintenance, you're looking at about, make sure you check out my video library to $200 in labor videos on. Generally speaking, you might find a deal out there for right around $100 in labor from PCV valves, air filters, cabin air filters, about $100, a bunch of stuff to $200 in the labor. And if they're going to charge me for parts, caliper bracket tightened down, plus or minus, and we could get to moving on to installing the brake pads. You might be able to find cheaper pads. The biggest thing is you want to make sure your wear indicator is in the proper location. Any kit that you get, make sure it has a hardware kit. Don't skimp yourself if you're going to do it yourself, but if you're going to have a shop do it, I would expect to pay somewhere around about $250 per axle for parts and everything, unless you want to go with a kit like this. They're probably going to upcharge it to about $315, I would say, and then $100 in labor, so about $400 for this particular brake job at a shop. Hopefully this video helped you get what you need to get the job done. If it did, please make sure you comment below with the year, make, model, engine size of your vehicle. Check out my video library. Please tell all your friends about me. If you have any questions about your vehicle, make sure you comment below or text me at 925-418-5096. Hopefully one of these two videos right here will help you out on another repair or on a friend or family member's vehicle repair. Like, subscribe, share. I'll see you guys on the next hopefully helpful video. Thanks for watching.